Well, good day, everyone. My name is Andrew Franklin, and this is a presentation dealing with ethical approaches to cyberpsychology. In this presentation, I will discuss resources that could be utilized in order to solve ethical dilemmas. And in this presentation, I will also differentiate 5 different leading ethical approaches to resolving dilemmas and issues that crop up within research. Moral issues and dilemmas abound in cyberpsychology. Some of these issues may be related to distributive justice, for example, ensuring that everyone has access to a technology, whereas other issues may deal with complex issues involving research, for example, the ethical nature of using data from social media. In research, there are 2 different approaches taken to address ethical issues. One approach is the normative inquiry approach, which focuses on analyzing and recommending moral systems. The other approach is descriptive in nature and involves reporting the ways in which members of various groups view moral issues. There are a lot of resources that could inform how to resolve ethical issues. These resources include the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, and the Belmont Report. From the Belmont Report, 3 principles that provide the foundation for most ethical guidelines in behavioral research are respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. More specific to psychology, the American Psychological Association has modified these principles into 5 principles. 1, beneficence and non maleficence. 2, fidelity and responsibility. 3, integrity. 4, justice. And 5, respect for people's rights and dignity. While these guidelines are great and they offer a wealth of things to take into consideration when making a decision, these guidelines cannot be a substitute for ethical reasoning. Ethical reasoning is important because sometimes principles come in conflict and these decisions must be made in certain contexts. Furthermore, implementational details cannot be captured in an ethics code, and the principlist approach to ethics emphasizes cognitive processes, but research overwhelmingly points out the role of affective processes. Ethical issues in cyberpsychology involve questions of what morality is and what it requires of us. While it would be great to have a set of straightforward principles dealing with cyberpsychology, there are a number of theories with disparate conceptions of what morality is and what it means to live morally. Now I will cover some of the leading ethical approaches found in the Western tradition. Immanuel Kant developed a deontological approach to ethics. Deon simply means duty in Greek. He believed that the intention behind the action is most important and the consequences not so relevant. He had 2 categorical imperatives in his viewpoint, and he believed that there was an inherent rightness or wrongness in one's actions. The first formula is that of universal law, and the second formula is that of humanity itself. Let's start with the first formula. The first categorical imperative that he has is summed up in this adage: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In other words, do unto others in a way in which, if the roles were reversed, you would be fine with it. The second categorical imperative involved valuing people as ends within themselves and not using them as a means to an end. In other words, respect all rational persons. Kant's imperatives have been deemed to be inadequate because it does not generalize to situations with 2 or more conflicting duties. For example, what if you have a duty to tell the truth and keep a promise at the same time, and you can only do one or the other? Tap the modern day politician for detailed examples. How can you resolve this conflict using a Kantian approach? The hacker's ethic, as proposed by Richard Stallman, formerly of MIT, is an example of someone adhering to Kant's first categorical imperative. Deontologists emphasize duty, and teleological utilitarians emphasize the end. Teleo is Greek for the end. The utilitarian goal is to produce the greatest teleological benefit for all agents impacted by the agent's actions. In other words, the choice about the rightness or wrongness of an action is held to a standard of optimizing consequences for all agents impacted by the agent's actions. John Stuart Hill and Jeremy Bentham were classical utilitarians. Given that an agent cannot know all potential consequences of any given action, it's necessary for the agent to reflect on intentions behind their decided actions. If an agent has difficulty sorting through all of the possible actions and possible consequences, then they could use the act and rule consequentialism. Act and rule consequentialism goes like this: if the act causes optimal good for those involved, then it's moral. If the act conforms to a rule that is itself part of a set of rules whose acceptance would result in the greatest good, then it is moral. Limitations of the teleological viewpoint is that it is deficient when applied to questions of social justice or individual justice. Consider the trolley dilemma. Is it morally permissible to turn the trolley onto the track spur and slay one person in order to save five if you had to make a choice? Let's stick with this trolley dilemma. In the trolley dilemma, there appears to be evidence of people having dual processes at work when individuals are making decisions. Controlled cognitive evaluations drive utilitarian judgments and weigh the cost and pros, while automatic affective processes drive non utilitarian processes and reflect prohibition of harm. Again, we see the affective components of ethical decision making are not directly considered in this theory or other theories. Rawls was a huge proponent of social contract. A social contract is a theoretical framework, and it involves justice, and it argues that utilitarianism should be rejected. He thought it would be rejected because it focuses on the quantity of happiness in terms of people instead of equal distribution of happiness with the application of a difference principle. Let's put that in lay terms. In other words, he believed that utilitarianism should be used to the degree in which it brings everyone a measure of happiness that is parallel to their counterpart, and should there be a difference in happiness or excellent outcome, it should be to the advantage of the most disadvantaged. The limitations of contracts theory is that it gives the foundation for minimalist morality, and agents are only constrained to act morally if a formal contract is in place, hence social contract. Aristotle developed the virtues ethic that contrasts with both duty and consequences types of ethics. He believed that morality is best understood in terms of the character traits displayed in action. The virtue ethicist considers the wider implications related to one's actions. Virtue ethics emphasizes both moral and intellectual virtues in every moral agent. Intellectual virtues are the result of proper education and represent excellences, for example, abilities to reason, judge, and understand well. The virtue of eudaimonism is expressed in every action aiming at some good, and Aristotle viewed virtue as practical wisdom formulated by the development of character. The West virtue ethics is very similar to East virtue ethics, particularly as expressed in Confucian thought. In the 20th century, many philosophers have made a plea for a return back to virtue ethics, albeit in nuanced ways. For example, Anscombe argued that a modern day preoccupation with law that emphasizes duty was too inflexible, and there needed to be more focus on affective processes for moral psychology. McIntyre's historical understandings of virtues in different community settings was an effort to see how systems were applied. Some researchers argue that virtue ethics has limitations because its philosophy by itself is not satisfactory for a global world. We'll end the presentation by talking about Floridi's informational ethics. Floridi was a researcher who argued that traditional approaches focus too much on the impact of one's actions on others, and that traditional theories discussed thus far do not adequately account for the effect that one's actions may have on biological, social, and informational environments. For Floridi, he believed that being/information has an inherent value and that everything in our world is capable of making morally right and wrong decisions independently. And this includes technology. In other words, moral good and evil can be established even in the absence of conscious human beings. He believed that what is informational is real. His ethical approach was very metaphysical indeed. John Searle offered a critique of Floridi's work by objecting to his viewpoint. He emphasized the difference between epistemic fact and epistemic subjectivity. He asserted that while consciousness in human beings has distinct information, there is no intrinsic information in maps, computers, and molecules. He asserted that the sense in which they contain information is relative to conscious minds processing them. In lay terms, this is what that means. In other words, information exists relative to consciousness. Using the Chinese room argument, Searle goes on to stress that the moral agency requires an understanding of the nature of good or harm in question, and that simple computation by a computer program based on established thresholds of processing does not equate to moral reasoning. Overall, consciousness, and this is Searle's thoughts, consciousness should be viewed as the basis of information rather than information as the basis of consciousness.